So, what if the single greatest source of human happiness is something we tend to, well, overlook? Today, we're diving into a really profound scientific discovery about joy and the surprisingly personal crisis it can spark once you really get what it means. Okay, so here's the headline. And this isn't just some feel-good quote. This is the main takeaway from one of the longest research studies in history. We're talking about the Harvard study of adult development. They've been tracking people for over 80 years. And after all that time, the science is crystal clear. The quality of our relationships is the number one thing that predicts how happy and even how healthy we'll be. But, what happens when a scientific fact doesn't just feel like a piece of trivia, but something that completely flips your world upside down? For the author of our source material, this simple truth led to a really jarring and deeply personal question, one that honestly sent them into a total tailspin. And that brings us right to our first section, a shocking truth. This is all about that initial moment of impact, where a piece of data stops being data and becomes a personal revelation. The author's first reaction wasn't to argue with it. I mean, they were a rational person. They accepted the research, but it still felt weird. They'd always known that connection was important. Of course we all do. But the most important thing, like more important than your career or money or personal goals, now that was the part that was just totally unexpected. And this is where it gets tough. Because if you truly accept this as a fact, you kind of have to turn the spotlight back on your own life. If relationships really are the key, then you have to ask yourself, what kind of foundation have I actually been building my life on? Which leads us straight into Section 2, Living Life Wrong. This is where the author really starts to grapple with this painful idea that maybe, just maybe, their priorities and their whole chase for happiness might have been, well, completely off track. Wow, that is a heavy thing to admit to yourself. But it wasn't about beating themselves up or feeling ashamed. The source calls it a sting, that sharp, you can't ignore it pain of realizing that the way you've been living wasn't actually set up to get you the happiness you were looking for all along. Before this big realization, the author talks about being stuck in this kind of mental trap, a constant, relentless obsession to figure it all out, to find some perfect, abstract blueprint for how to live. It was just this confusing, non-stop chase inside their own head. And this whole chase was just completely exhausting. It's described with a few metaphors that just get more and more intense. First, life felt like a slippery fish. You know that feeling? The harder you squeeze and try to hold on, the faster it just slides right out of your grasp. It's this constant feeling of panic, like you can't get a grip on anything. And then the chase gets even more hopeless. It becomes like running after your own shadow. It's this pointless, breathless race to catch something you can literally never, ever grab. And while you're busy with that desperate sprint, you look back and realize the day is over. Your past is just gone, fading away. And it all just builds to this ultimate feeling of being completely adrift and totally lost. Like a tiny spacecraft just floating in space, getting yanked around by the gravity of all these different planets. Absolutely no control, no real destination, just profound confusion and a desperate search for something, anything to hold on to. But, it's often out of that confusion that a breakthrough comes. And that brings us to Section 3, the liberating realization. This is the big turning point, where hitting what feels like rock bottom actually opens up a brand new way forward. And here's the funny thing about it. Admitting you've been living wrong is painful, for sure, but it's also incredibly freeing. And why is that? Because once you see what the real problem is, you can stop chasing all the wrong solutions. The struggle just stops. And in the place of all that frantic struggle, this strange kind of peace started to settle in. There's a real calm that comes with finally having a map, even if you realize you were way off course. Because now, for the first time, you actually know which direction to start walking. Now, this slide is great because it just lays out the whole transformation so clearly. On the left, you've got the old way, that chaotic, obsessive hunt for some perfect, complicated idea of life. And on the right, the new way, a peaceful acceptance of a simple, real-world truth, that happiness is all about connection. The frantic running gets replaced by this quiet confidence that, hey, you can actually change course. So that brings us to our final, and honestly the most important section, a new purpose. Because look, a realization is one thing, but how does it actually change how you live your life, day in and day out? Well, the very first change was on the inside. The author says their mind was just thirsty for this kind of direction. After all that chaotic drifting, this one simple idea, that connection is the key, it became this powerful anchor. All the endless questions started to quiet down, and they were replaced by this clear, sharp focus on what really matters: human relationships. And this shift just fundamentally reframed everything. This slide really nails it. Life with others wasn't just a chore anymore, or some practical thing you had to do to get ahead or feel a little less lonely. It wasn't a means to an end. It became the end itself. It became the purpose, the whole point. And this change wasn't just some big idea. You could actually feel it in the day-to-day. With this new focus, every single interaction started to transform. The source describes how even the most ordinary conversations, chatting with a barista, a quick call with your mom, they started to feel meaningful. Each one had this quiet, luminous weight to it, because it wasn't just small talk anymore. It was a chance to build the one thing that truly matters. And just like that, the frantic search for some perfect, complicated answer was over. It was replaced by a quiet confidence, a real conviction in a simple, profound truth, that if there really is one true path to happiness, the path of genuine human connection, this might just be it. Which kind of leaves us with a question for ourselves, doesn't it? If decades of research and this really powerful personal story both point to the exact same thing, that our joy is found in connecting with others, then what does that mean for you, right now, in your life? What conversation will you choose to start today?